Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Chen Lu, and I work for the Kansas Department of Commerce as the International Trade and Business Recruitment Project Manager. Today's focus is critical to the economic growth of our state, trade with Mexico. The importance of maintaining a strong trade relationship with our neighbor cannot be overstated. Mexico has become a vital trading partner for Kansas, with billions of dollars worth of goods flowing between Kansas and Mexico each year. In 2022, Kansas exports to Mexico reached 3.1 billion, which is about 22% of total Kansas exports, making it Kansas' #1 export destination. Compared with 2021, Kansas exports to Mexico increased by more than 360 million. Today, we will hear best practices for trade with Mexico from Mr. Tom Johnston. He will present for about 40 minutes, and then we will conduct a short Q&A session. So if you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the chat window. We will address them during the Q&A. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Mr. Tom Johnston. Tom Johnston is the managing partner of Business Development Partners, a Mexico City-based market research firm that has provided support to Kansas companies in Mexico since 2001 through the Kansas Department of Commerce. Tom's main areas of focus are manufacturing, industrial regulation, and renewable energy. He holds a BA in Latin America Studies from the State University of New York and a master's degree in public policy from the University of California at Berkeley. That's the bio Tom provided me. Now I'll tell you the Tom I know. Tom is a true expert in all things Mexico related, especially in trade. Rumor has it that he is so well versed in Mexican commerce that he can run any trade activity, which is equivalent of watching paint dry into a fiesta. And he is the only person I know who can recite the entire USMCA agreement from memory in Spanish and in English. So please give a warm welcome to our trade guru, honorary tequila connoisseur, a gentleman and a scholar, Mr. Tom Johnston. Tom, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Lou, for that wacky and wonderful introduction. And thanks to the Department of Commerce team for inviting me once again to participate in this meeting this morning. And good morning to everybody. As Lou mentioned, my colleagues and I have worked with Kansas for a long time, with the Department of Commerce and with Kansas companies, and so it's always a pleasure for us to have the opportunity to get together virtually or otherwise to talk about Mexico. There's a lot of material prepared to discuss over the next hour, so I would like to begin by telling you what I'm going to talk about so that you have an idea about what's coming. First, I'm going to just touch on two brief topics, the first of which is what we do here in the Kansas-Mexico office and how we assist Kansas companies in the Mexican market. The second is a brief update on the COVID-19 situation, which I'm guessing it may not be a hot topic these days in the US, but it did impact our business environment quite a bit over the past 2 years, and so I just wanted to let everybody know what's happening with that. Following that, we will move into the two principal portions of the remarks. The first will be about a couple of trends or circumstances that are taking place right now in Mexican industrial environments that I think will provide some useful context for anybody considering requesting a service or participating in this market. And then we will review the practices that we feel are examples of the type of approach or practice that will allow our companies to have the best opportunity to achieve success in our market. So without further ado, may we have the first slide, please? Okay, there we go. Kansas, Mexico office, just to mention again what Lou mentioned. We've worked with Kansas as partners for assistance in the Mexico market for approximately 20 years. My colleagues and I, we are a private company, a market research and trade support services company, and it's a micro enterprise of 4 people. Nonetheless, over this time, we've worked on projects for probably over 200 Kansas companies by now, and carried out well over 200 projects. May we have the next slide, please? Okay. Excuse me. The services that we provide for Kansas companies are really fundamentally driven by the needs of each company. Circumstances are different in each case frequently, and so we talk to the companies and see really what's going to best serve them, and that's how we organize the scope of work for our projects. That said, the vast majority of projects or requests for service that we receive are for partner searches, and this usually takes the form of looking for a local Mexican company that will partner with you to be your sales representative and importation partner in Mexico, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Nonetheless, there are other types of services that we provide, and so I just want to mention a couple of those. One is customized market research. If you are thinking that you might be interested in Mexico, but you're not sure if the type of industry you sell to is active in Mexico, we can provide you information on that. Or if you would just like an overview of what's happening in the economy and industry here, we provide reports on that. Sometimes companies would like a very specific type of information, like what's happening in pet products. Is it booming or is it flat these days? Or business practices. I'm going to a meeting in Mexico. Do I need to wear a suit? Things like that. You're perfectly welcome to check with us on that. We also provide regulatory research, particularly for products that go in or on the human body, or chemicals and things like that, which have which require additional levels of regulatory compliance, and we can give you an idea about what those types of requirements would be. If you're planning on traveling to Mexico and you would like to add a couple of meetings with local companies to your trip, you can ask us if we can arrange some meetings. We'll be happy to do that. And as I said, services are really driven by the needs of each company. Next slide, please. Regarding COVID-19, I just wanted to mention that we went through this period of about 2 years, like everywhere else, where we were significantly impacted because there were a lot of closures of companies. There were limitations on travel, and there were, principally for us, there were no longer in-person meetings being held, and in-person business events like conferences and trade shows were not being held in person over that time. But fortunately, the impact on public health has declined significantly over the past 6 months. And so we have a lot fewer cases, we have lower rates of hospitalization, and most or almost all of the prior restrictions have been lifted. The most important thing to take away from that is that now it's possible to conduct in-person meetings, and the trade shows are returning to in-person events. I would like to just mention regarding COVID, however, that as you can see on the little world on the picture, those types of masks, that custom has not gone away completely here in Mexico. You see a lot of people wearing masks, and if you are coming to Mexico for some type of activity, business-related activity, it's not unheard of that you may be asked to wear a mask either to enter a government building or to go into stores or a convention center or an event of some kind. So if that's a topic that's important to you, it would be good to just verify that before you make your plan, so that you know what the requirement will be for that. Next slide, please. Okay. The first of the 2 principal components of my remarks this morning regards the trends or circumstances that I was mentioning. And the first of those, which is on the lips of practically everybody in business here these days, is nearshoring. You probably hear a lot about it, or at least read a lot about it in the business media. And fundamentally, in this case, we're talking about moving manufacturing from someplace far from your market to someplace much closer to your market. If we're talking about companies in the United States that were manufacturing in China, which is a lot of companies, that's really a super hot topic right now in Mexico, and it is having a big impact on our industrial environment. A couple of reasons for that. First, we discovered during the COVID-19 pandemic the famous supply chain disruptions, where it became increasingly difficult for brands based in the United States to obtain their products manufactured in China, either because the factory in China was shut down for the pandemic or because there were disruptions to the flow of containers for shipping, maritime shipping and things like that. And now, particularly in the context of the war in Ukraine, there are heightened concerns over the potential for some type of intervention by China in Taiwan or other types of conflict, trade or diplomatic between the United States and China that could impact the facility with which you are able to manufacture in China or elsewhere in Asia, possibly, and easily and cheaply bring your goods over to the United States. And so there is a lot of let's say, discussion and activity with companies looking at Mexico as a possible alternative to manufacture in Mexico a portion of what they were currently or what they are currently manufacturing in China, or perhaps move the entire manufacturing process to Mexico to gain some of the cost advantages that Mexico offers and have their manufacturing much closer to the United States in the event of disruptions of the type that we just mentioned. One of the things that is happening that impacts our customers' business is that the drive to move manufacturing to Mexico is expanding the manufacturing base here in Mexico, which was already significantly large, but now it's becoming even larger. And there's discussion of a boom in manufacturing, which will drive demand for the types of equipment that goes into manufacturing plants, processing plants, and all types of related secondary operations, transport, and even hotels and things like that in the industrial areas. It's happening now, particularly in the northern regions of the country, but we also have some expansion around Mexico City and in some other individual locations. And so this is driving growth in certain areas. Just to give some examples, one of these areas is automotive manufacturing, one of Mexico's most important advanced manufacturing industries. There's a ton of new investment in expansion of plants and establishment of new manufacturing plants to supply the automotive manufacturing industry here. And in particular, now with the evolution toward electric vehicles around the world, companies that make finished vehicles are now bringing some of their EV component manufacturing to Mexico, and that is looking like it will be a significant area of growth going forward, a category of the automotive sector. But also, as I mentioned, industrial parks, there's huge growth in the construction and expansion of industrial parks these days. So if your company makes something that is used in these types of facilities, like whether it be security systems or parking lot equipment or coatings for roofs or telescopic lifts and all this kind of thing, the base of demand here in Mexico for those types of products will necessarily expand due to this trend in nearshoring. Also, the media has mentioned many times regarding airports and air travel because of the increase in folks coming from other countries to their industrial operations here in Mexico. So you have equipment for airports and things like that because the airports are frequently being expanded. And we have the next slide, please. Okay, the second one I would like to mention is the USMCA, US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which is the updated version of the former venerable NAFTA agreement, which I think everybody is probably familiar with. It's not really a trend, but it's a circumstance that really impacts folks who are, let's say, US-based companies competing internationally and are looking to sell or are selling in the Mexican market. Your principal benefit from this USMCA is the duty-free status of your products if they are manufactured in the North American region, which includes Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So if you have some type of cross-border manufacturing and your products are eligible for consideration as NAFTA origin, then this gives you a duty-free import to Mexico. One of the key updates of the USMCA with regard to NAFTA was the increase in, or the making more stricter, the rules of origin for eligibility as a NAFTA origin, a USMCA origin product. And so by increasing the percentage of components of a finished product that need to be of North American origin in order to comply with the origin requirements, now companies are moving even more of their supply chain to Mexico in order to have, let's say if they were importing products from China or elsewhere in the world that would not be sufficient to comply, they are now moving portions of that manufacturing to Mexico, and that's contributing to the expansion of the manufacturing base. I want to mention a couple things about the competitiveness of U.S. Products. For a long time, decades past, the United States manufacturers practically had a captive market here in Mexico, but that has changed over the past 15 or 20 years with the arrival of companies from Europe and Asia. Nonetheless, U.S.-made products still enjoy a very positive reputation for quality and for price. So that has not changed. That's good. The United States-made products benefit from the duty advantages and the location advantages of being manufactured in North America for easy access to the Mexican market. And so they do have these advantages. Nonetheless, I would like to really emphasize that things have changed, particularly over the past 15 years in terms of the competitive environment in Mexico. It's much more competitive because we have had a real wave of companies coming from countries around the world and other parts of the world, particularly China. I think that's a topic folks are familiar with. And so you have a lot more industrial equipment made in China that is competitively priced and increasingly competitive in terms of quality, particularly quality vis-a-vis price. And so China is a big player now, whereas 20 years ago, it wasn't a particularly important player. At the same time, we've always had some competition in industrial markets from Spain and in certain niches from Italy and Scandinavia on some types of equipment, and Japan, of course. But in recent years, we have had a significant influx of quality goods at competitive prices from countries that were not even on the map here before. And just to give 3 examples, one would be Turkey, very important emerging player these days. India, also very aggressive new entrant into the Mexican market, and Brazil as well. Brazil and products such as industrial machinery and particularly agricultural machinery. So these are countries that we didn't have to compete with before, and now we do. So it's not a slam dunk. I don't know if it ever was, but certainly it's a tough competitive marketplace. But fortunately, U.S.-made goods do have some important advantages going in. May we have the next slide, please? Okay, now we have arrived at the best practices. These are some, let's say, practices or elements that we find really helps to give our companies the best opportunity to achieve success. Not all are appropriate or applicable to all cases, but it's just something to think about. The first one I wanted to discuss is the issue of, do I need a sales rep or not? This is the most common question that comes up, and sometimes companies are reluctant or hesitant to work with a local sales rep, but I'd like to address that first off. In the case of most of the companies that we work with, their products, it's practically unavoidable and necessary to work with a local sales representative. There's a couple of really important upsides about this. One is that these companies already know the market. If presuming you enter into a relationship with a qualified representative, they already know the market. They have relationships established to the end users and channels for selling. They have sales staff, presumably, and so there's knowledge and there's presence there that coming in from the outside you wouldn't have. Second important element of this is that somebody has to import your product into Mexico in order to sell it. And so this is a key role that these companies play. They import the product in order to be able to sell it in the market. And also, if your product has some type of particular regulatory compliance requirement, in most cases, the local sales representative will carry out the procedures with the government agencies in order to obtain the permits, registration, or whatever type of permission you need to be able to legally sell your product here. Now, this is more important in the case of some types of products than others, like, as I mentioned, the ones that like medical or dietary supplements and things that go into the body or on the body, like cosmetics or something like that, or for livestock as well. Or chemicals and things that are, for whatever reason, require additional or extra regulatory compliance. And so a local sales rep is key in being able to obtain these permissions. But as folks, probably some of the folks on this call already are working with a partner in Mexico, you may have had the experience that it's not that easy to make that relationship work the way you would like. And communication is fundamental to that. There's no one easy solution to this, but just make an effort, we would suggest, to try and build the type of communication and trust to the degree that's possible, with your partner, because if not, there's frustration that can lead to distrust, and that is not a good basis for that type of relationship. It's happened many times where our clients in the United States will tell us, I like my business partner in Mexico. I think he's a good guy. I sent him a couple of emails. I didn't get any answer. So then I called him. We talked. It was very friendly. And when we got off the call, I wasn't sure what we had agreed to. That's the level of fuzziness that makes it difficult to make things work well. I would encourage you to try and do your best to overcome that and have more clear communications. And if necessary, you can ask us as well to assist. And we have assisted on a number of occasions in trying to clear out some of that fuzziness from these communication channels. On the next point, mention sales partner, national or regional. Mexico is a very large country with distinct industrial regions and regions that have different types of business activities in them, whether it be agriculture, mining, or whatever. And so it's unlikely in most circumstances that a national rep, one company that says, I'll cover the whole country for you, it's unusual that would be the best choice for you. You may want to go with a rep for Monterrey, a rep for Mexico City, and a rep for Guadalajara. That's common. Or maybe just choose a couple of regions and say, I'm going to have 2 reps, one in each one of these 2 regions. But if you have the type of product that perhaps is you're going to sell fewer units at a higher cost or something like that, and that the end users need to seek out the representative in Mexico, it may be possible to have a nationwide rep, but that would be on a case-by-case basis. And again, in our conversations before carrying out a project, we would talk about that. And I'll mention direct sales again in a moment. I included political context or established industrial vendor here just because it happens quite a bit in Mexico that some big business is driven by massive government contracts. And each time there's a change in government, either at the federal or state level, you have some of these companies that appear like a genie out of a bottle that all of a sudden are receiving these massive government contracts because they have personal relationships with people who are newly have access to power over this type of the assignment of these contracts. And they say, we're going to make millions of bucks and we're going to sell a big thing. This is something that I mentioned because our clients have told us, a company from Mexico contacted me, say he wants to buy 1 million units, of my product. This is legit. This happens like in supplies for hospitals and things where you have the National Health Service, or in energy where you have the National Oil Company and things like that. We usually try to shy away from this type of relationship. It could potentially be a big sale for you, but it's not usually a solid, more long-term relationship, because these companies disappear and appear like from one day to the next. So it's more solid, in our opinion, to work with a company that's more established, which we can investigate for you if you are interested in a particular company. They've been in the market for 20 years. They sell to John Deere and a few other, well-known clients. So that gives you a feeling like these guys are not going to disappear from one day to the next. And finally, regarding direct sales, it's happened many times that a client company will come to us and say, I'm not crazy about working with a sales rep. I really would like to just sell direct from me to my customers in Mexico. It's unlikely that this will be a success, particularly if you have a type of product like, I don't know, air compressors or something like that you need to continually be moving product and selling to an expanding base of customers, because most of the customers in Mexico are going to tell you, I like your product, I'd like to buy it, but I'm only going to buy it here in Mexico because I'm a manufacturer of something, but I'm not an importer. So I'm not going to do all this complicated procedures to import the product. I just want to go to a local dealer in Guadalajara and buy it. And so that's what makes direct sales difficult, unless you make a type of machinery that costs $1 million a piece, and you're going to sell 1 or 2 or 3 in a year in Mexico. It may be possible for you to sell, if you're selling to Cemex or Bimbo or Pemex or one of these giant companies. They're already capable to do the importation and they're willing to do it. But that's, again, something you would need to look at on a case-by-case basis. And so those are things we talk about in our initial meetings when we work with you. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to quickly go through a couple of examples that we have had where we felt like our client from Kansas really did a bunch of things that gave them an opportunity for success, and they greatly benefited from these particular practices. The first is a company called Pyramid Foods that is a maker of bottled condiments, particularly barbecue sauce. And so this, the head of this company, Mr. Luther Tooks, he did a whole bunch of things that we just loved working with him here on his project. He first attended an in-person Kansas Department of Commerce exporting event in Kansas, where we met him. So he wanted to learn about potential in the Mexican market. We talked about that personally. After that, he requested a business partner search from our office. So we went out and found some candidates to be importers of his product, and he engaged with them and began discussing potential business. Following that, he actually traveled to Mexico with a trade mission, not organized by us, but he asked my colleague Monica and me to arrange some additional meetings for him while he was here. He went to numerous meetings, did the groundwork of going to these companies, seeing their offices and getting a feel for what they were like. And he demonstrated great perseverance in follow-up communications. Unfortunately, it coincided with the pandemic, that follow-up period, and yet he maintained communication with a number of these companies and really tried to keep that opportunity alive. He also requested some feedback and assistance from us from time to time, which we collaborated with him on. And in 2021, to our great pleasure, Mr. Tooks advised us that he had begun shipping pallets of product to a partner that he had to come to agreement with in Mexico. And so, we were figuratively popping the champagne here. I don't know what is the status of that now, but at least it's an example of the steps that he took, which we thought were really the right steps, and they paid off, and he started shipping his product. Next slide, please. Okay, this company, the Teledentists, the Kansas company, we just worked with them last month. And this is a completely different example. This company had already engaged with some potential business partners in Mexico, and they asked us to provide them some information on the market and their potential partners so that once they began negotiations on possibly forming an alliance with these companies, they went into the meetings already armed with some knowledge about the market, and were not going to be completely unaware of what was happening here. So we prepared a report, we researched and prepared a report for them regarding what was happening with telemedicine and teledentistry in general in Mexico, some regulatory issues that they would probably want to keep in mind, and some information about the two companies they were going to meet with, about the types of activities those companies had, and what they had done in teledentistry, and really where teledentistry was in terms of the evolution of that niche of market here in Mexico. And so they received that. Oh, this is also a commercial for our office. The head of the company sent Lou a message saying, "The report is powerful and positive. Thanks so much for providing so much useful information to be used as we expand." We were very pleased because that's what we want to do. We want to help these companies, give them tools in order to have an advantage when they go into negotiations or make the first steps to enter the market. So that was, we felt, a good practice that they did. Next slide, please. Okay, here are some, this is something of a grab bag of various other things that we have just observed over time in our work with companies entering our market that we would like to mention because these are things that come up. Number one, availability of service and replacement parts is important. This is particularly in the case where you have a type of equipment or machinery that you're going to sell into the market, and it, you know, there are things that wear out, hoses and you know, parts that break down, and the user is going to need to obtain those somewhere. Now, it's best if they can obtain them from the dealer who is your sales representative in their local area, and the dealer either has the parts on hand or can easily get them from you as the manufacturer. We saw a big example of this when we worked with some Brazilian agricultural equipment manufacturers, and the dealers that we talked to told us, you know, our customers tell us they like the Brazilian equipment, it's good, but they're not going to continue buying it because every time they need a replacement, a washer or a hose or something like that, it takes months to get the replacement part from Brazil. So they were giving up on those Brazilian brands in order to, you know, probably return to a US brand where it was more easy to get the parts. So that's something that's very important to work with a local partner on, to make sure you have a plan in place for who's going to provide service and replacement parts. Number two, trade shows are a great source of market intelligence and contacts. This is not news to anybody. Everybody does trade shows. Everybody knows what they're for. But I want to emphasize it because one important thing that we are discovering these days is that the idea of calling up companies and saying, "Hey, I would like to send you information about, you know, this product that's really great for your type of business," that those days are practically gone now. First, because of the issues that we have had with, let's say, fraud or concern over unknown people calling up the companies began to reduce their accessibility to cold calling and sending emails. And then during the pandemic period, they really shut that down because people began to work from home. And so now if you can actually call a company on the phone, they'll tell you, "Oh, well, the person who handles that does work from home and I can't give you their contact information." So there's all kinds of ways that they set up these barriers. And so we find that now more than ever, even if you just walk the show, but it's particularly useful if you exhibit at the show, it's a tremendous opportunity to make personal contact with companies, because a lot of the folks, these production managers and stuff, are saying, "I don't want people contacting me about great products for me. If I need a product, I'm going to go out and look for it, and that way I know that I'm driving, you know, my search for this product." And that's where trade shows play a big role. Next, product samples. How much is appropriate? We mentioned this because it's come up on a number of occasions where one of our customers or our clients in the US will tell us, "You know, I've been sort of negotiating with a potential business partner in Mexico, and he keeps asking for samples." So we started sending them, And he asked for more and more and more, and we still haven't come to an agreement, and he's not selling anything. And he told me that this is it's a normal business practice in Mexico, and that's part of Mexican business culture. Well, I want to mention that the answer to how much is appropriate is how much you feel is appropriate. You've been in business for a long time, you know how much samples you customarily send, and I would tell you that if it feels funny, then it probably is. Just stick with what you would normally do, because sometimes here in Mexico, there are some business people that would try to get a certain amount of advantage by playing the local business culture card and saying, oh, this is something we always do in Mexico. That may be true in certain circumstances, but in the case of the samples, I would give that a grain of salt and just go with what you customarily do, regardless of whether it's the Mexican market or the US market. Next, security. A hot topic for some people. You see images on TV of the narcos and all this kind of stuff. It's kind of scary. But what we tell people when they ask us, is it safe to travel to Mexico for business? We say, it depends what you do. If you carry out routine standard business activities, like you go to Monterrey or Mexico City or some city, you meet with your business partners or the potential customers during the day, you go out to lunch at a restaurant, you go out to dinner at a restaurant, or you have dinner in the hotel, or you have a drink in the hotel. That's pretty standard, and that is, I would say, as safe as it is anywhere else in the United States or Europe or wherever you go there. If you like to combine fun with your business trips and want to go out at night and hit the clubs and maybe meet new friends after midnight and things like that, that's where you get into the area where it's not safe. So if you're going out late at night and wandering around in neighborhoods, of course, that's unsafe. But if you stick to standard business activities, we, in our 25 years or so of carrying out these projects, we have never had a security-related incident, that would scare anyone of our companies traveling here to Mexico, because most of them stick to those types of practices. So that's what we have to say about security. Time zones, I throw this in because it's been driving me bananas over the past year trying to arrange teleconferences and virtual meetings. Mexico actually has 4 time zones. Most people don't realize that because most of the time you're just calling back and forth to Mexico City. But particularly in a couple of regions, if you are in the agricultural industry in Sinaloa and this portion of the Pacific coast where you have a lot of commercial agriculture, they have a 1-hour difference time zone from Mexico City. And particularly if you are working in the Tijuana, Mexicali, inbound manufacturing maquiladora corridor, they have a 2-hour time difference from Mexico City. And if for some reason you are in, let's say, the tourism industry and you are selling to hotels in Cancun and Playa del Carmen and places like that, they also have, I believe, 2-hour difference from Mexico City. Might be 1 hour, but in any case, the rule of thumb on that is double check the time on the date of the call or the meeting or the travel or whatever that you're going to do, because Mexico has more time zones than people usually are aware of. Also, one more note on that, to make things even more impossible to comprehend, this year we will no longer be changing the time for spring and fall. Prior to this year, we did that. We had daylight savings time, but our current president has declared that we will now be working on God's time, which is apparently without daylight savings time. And so this year we will not be changing the time in the spring or the fall. So either take that into consideration, or if you really need to know what time it is, just send us an email. We'll be happy to tell you. And to wind up, I would like to mention that I don't know if anybody in the US follows our local politics too much, but we have a government currently that is takes quite a different approach than previous governments to industrial regulation, and let's say is not overtly business friendly, and that's had a certain degree of impact on some industries, particularly energy and also manufacturing in terms of access to electricity and things like that. And we are having a presidential election in 2024. And we presume that the current president will be departing and the new president will be coming in. So that may have some degree of impact on, let's say, the environment for investment or for manufacturing operations going forward. And so I just want to throw that out there so folks are aware there's going to be political campaigns. And I understand that also in the United States, there is an election in 2024. So much like you will be having a lot of discussion and campaign events and stuff, we will be having that here as well. And people are, getting quite worked up about that. So that's kind of a backdrop of what's happening here. May we have the next slide, please? Okay, I think I did my portion of the comments a little more quickly than I expected, and fortunately that allows us to see Mr. Liu, who is, that's I believe that's the portrait of him that we have hanging on the wall here. He's the Obi-Wan Kenobi of the Kansas, Mexico office. Greatly appreciate and enjoy working with him. So if there's interest on the part of any of the companies joining us today in pursuing some type of project or service in Mexico or finding out something about working in Mexico, please don't hesitate to contact Lou and we can organize a call or a discussion and try and provide you the feedback and the support that you need. So with that, I will conclude my remarks and turn the microphone back over to Lou. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for the great information. Before we jump into the Q&A session, if you have more questions, please feel free to ask. A couple of things I would like to add. The services our Mexico office provide, that's the first 1 or 2 slides Tom showed. As long as you're a Kansas company manufacturing in Kansas, the service is free of charge to you. Your tax dollar already paid for it. So there's no out-of-pocket cost to you. You just don't pay anything. It is not a reimbursement program. It's zero cost. If you're interested in utilizing some of those programs and services, just send me an email and I will send you the application form. And then we'll go from there. Tom also mentioned trade shows. Either you exhibit at the trade show or you walk the trade show. Trade show is still one of the fastest way to get you in front of your business partners or potential buyers. Now at the Department of Commerce, we have multiple programs in place where we can help you to pay for some of the trade show expenses. For example, booth rental, booth build out, shipping your promotional material back and forth, purchasing furniture and monitors at the booth, paying for utility used at the booth, and also airfare assistance to help you travel. And that covers both international and domestic trade shows. But the key is the show has to attract a significant number of foreign visitors. If you're interested in some of those programs, feel free to email me and I'll be happy to share more detail with you. Now let's get into the Q&A session. The first question we have is, if traveling in Mexico to see customers, should we hire someone to pick us up and take us around, or is that not necessary? Now the person asking the question, they're traveling to Monterey area. Tom?
Okay, that's a good question. In some cases, when folks come here to Mexico for business travel, the local partner or the companies that they're going to meet with offer to pick you up at the airport and to take you to the meetings. That might happen. If nobody offers to do that, then it certainly is a best practice to arrange a car and driver from a reputable service provider that will pick you up at your hotel, take you to the meetings, wait for you at each meeting, and take you back to your hotel. And that is the type of service to arrange those transportation services. We can provide you that service if you would like. We'll contact some service providers that we are familiar with, that we've worked with before, and see if we can, arrange the transportation service for you. And the same situation takes place regarding an interpreter. If you happen to need an interpreter, in many cases, the folks you're going to meet with already speak English and you can do the meetings in English. But if you feel that you would like to have an interpreter with you, we can assist you in arranging to find an interpreter to accompany you to your meeting. So if that's a situation in real life that's coming up and you feel like you need a solution, don't hesitate to check with Lou about how we might be able to provide support on that.
Thank you, Tom. Next question we have is, we would like to find a construction companies to be our partners in Mexico. Now, that's a comment, not really a question, but I think it's a good way. Tom, can you explain to us normally the process for you to find potential partners for our companies? How do you go about?
Okay. In each case, when a company, let's say a Kansas company, is interested in requesting a service, they contact Lou. Lou arranges a discussion, let's say, a conference call between us, Commerce, and the company, and we walk through what it is that the company is trying to achieve in Mexico, because sometimes they already have some business there, and sometimes they already have a partner. But if they need to find a partner, we talk about, what they need the partner to do, the types of characteristics that the partner, they would like to find in the partner. If there's some kind of regional angle, they need a partner in Monterrey or in Mexico City or something. So we talk through all of that, and then if the project is approved by Commerce, then we go out and we look at all kinds of databases and directories and companies that we're already familiar with to see which ones maybe fit the profile as a partner. And the ones that we like the best, we call them up and we send them information, and we send them a pre-proposal saying this company in Kansas is interested in working with a local company. Are you interested? Are you qualified? We talk to them a little bit more to follow up. And if some of those companies say, I would like to have a discussion with this company in Kansas, those are the candidates that we put in the report that we send to you, and then you follow up with them to, let's say, arrange an initial teleconference with them to see if you might be a good match.
Thank you, Tom. I don't think we have any more questions in the Q&A box, so I'll ask my own question. For all of our participants, please feel free to drop in if you have anything you want to ask Tom. So Tom, what are some of the biggest barriers right now for U.S. companies to enter Mexico in general? That's my number one question. And number two, no one can predict the future, but based on your observation, how do you think the upcoming Mexican presidential election may impact trade relationship between the two countries, U.S. and Mexico? Thank you, Tom.
Okay, the first question regarding barriers, two things come to mind right off the bat. The first is the competition, which we briefly touched on in the comments. The market for almost all markets have become extraordinarily competitive over the past, even 5, 10, 15 years. The competition is really fierce. And so if your product is another brand of a type of product that's already well established, particularly if you are a smaller company competing against a brand of a multinational, the competition is very tough because those companies are already usually well established in the market, and they have infrastructure for sales and for representation in place. So competition is one potential barrier, and therefore it is incumbent upon the manufacturers and the brands to really find a way to distinguish themselves as, what makes me better than the competition, or this is the particular aspect, or these are the aspects of my product that are better, whether it be price, durability, functionality or whatever you usually use as what gives you a competitive advantage, you really need to rely on those things. And that goes hand in hand with the, let's say, the second barrier, which is something I also mentioned in my remarks about how difficult it is to engage with particularly end users, let's say, these days. Companies have taken a lot of measures to protect themselves from being contacted by anyone they don't know. And so many companies these days don't even provide a phone number, even on their website or in directories or anything like that. Or they might provide either a field on their website where you can enter in information and send it, which almost never yields any response. Or they may offer a email address like info or sales or something like that, where you can send a message and it's not too dependable to get a response. That's why I mentioned how important it is these days to find some way to engage physically or personally in person with people, like in a trade show or in a conference or in some type of in-person event. It's not impossible to make those connections, but it's almost impossible to make them with the actual end user buyers. That's another reason why engaging with a sales partner is becoming even more important than it always was, because those folks are the folks that have relationships with the end users. And it's usually a bit easier to, let's say, doing cold calling or sending emails to engage with dealers rather than end users, because the dealers are always looking for new business. It doesn't mean they'll necessarily want what we have to offer, but they're more receptive to communications. So that's what I would say regarding barriers. Regarding the potential results of the presidential election and how it might affect the trade relationship, I do feel strongly that there is probably no great risk to major changes or conflicts with the North American Free Trade Agreement, the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, because even our current president, who is not, a pro-business president, he supported the USMCA. There are a certain number of conflict topics, such as genetically modified corn, whether it's going to be allowed to be imported into Mexico, the glyphosate, the use of this glyphosate chemical on agricultural products is a touchy topic, and there's some other topics regarding Mexico's protection of state industries with regard to competition from private companies from abroad and investment in those areas. But those are the types of topics that you might have under any administration, except for the energy industry here right now. So there's probably not going to be a major threat to the fundamental framework of the USMCA. What we're looking at a little bit more at a more granular level, as sometimes folks like to say, is that we have some leading contenders to be the next president, and depending upon which one of them ultimately wins, unless there's an unexpected candidate, we can see some shades of difference in their approach to how much support and government support, let's say, they'll be likely to give to the business community, like incentives and things like this. And so it's really just a matter of internally who ends up being president. I don't see any, let's say, even centrist to right candidate likely to become president next. But if somebody who is a very stalwart supporter of the current president becomes the next president with the, let's say, on the platform or with the objective of pursuing or continuing the current president's industrial approach to policy, then we will probably continue to have some issues regarding the energy industry, where the current president wants it all to be state-run, and prior to that, it was open to private participation, private sector participation. So that's really kind of detailed panorama of what the issues are. But in terms of U.S.-Mexico trade, I don't foresee any major changes, even under the current government. For trade, there's practically no major issues, fundamental issues changing the relationship. So I think we can count on continuity for the foreseeable future.
All right, thank you, Tom. I did get another question. It's a pretty unique question regarding which port to use if the goods comes from Turkey into Mexico. Tom, feel free to make any comments, but I provided a list of Mexican ports in the chat. Feel free to take a look to the person who posed that question. Now, my advice to you is I would have definitely rely on the freight forwarding company's advice. They can typically help you figure out what is the most beneficial route, which is the best port to use. Cost-wise, which one is the most favorable to you. Again, those are called freight forwarding companies. If you don't have one that you're working with right now, you can go onto our website, Kansas Department of Commerce. Under the international section, we have a service providers list. So on there, not only we list a couple of freight forwarding companies, we also list other service providers involved in the export process. For example, banks that can issue letter of credits, law firms who can help with negotiating sales contract, or how to protect your intellectual property rights overseas. So again, go on to the Kansas Department of Commerce website and look under international and search for the International Trade Service Providers list. Tom, if you have any comment regarding port, feel free. But my understanding is most of the U.S. Mexico trade is the goods are transported by rail, most likely.
Yeah, no, I think that's the answer. What you said, even though you would think that if it's coming directly from Turkey or some other European port, it would likely be delivered to one of the Gulf side ports in Mexico, like Veracruz or Alta. I forget the name of the other one in Veracruz. But in any case, that's something that a freight forwarder will tell you because the rates are constantly changing. So I agree, Lou.
All right, thank you, Tom. I don't see any more questions. So the last question for me is, Mexico is a pretty big country. I have companies asking me, do we need to have a distributor for just using one distributor handling the whole country, or should we have one for each region, maybe north and south, maybe east and west? So what do companies do most of the time, and what's your recommendation, Tom?
Okay, just to expand on, I believe I touched on that in my remarks, but to just flesh that out a little bit. On the one hand, it depends on the type of product and whether you're probably going to be selling, a couple of units a year of an expensive product, or a lot more units of something that is going to be continually sold in different areas. The three main industrial markets are Guadalajara, Mexico City, and Monterrey, with also the Tijuana-Mexicali corridor being an important demand center. And so it's likely or possible that you may want to work with a regional representative, one for each of these particular markets. It's common that a potential rep will tell you that they serve the entire nation, but it's equally common that they don't really serve the entire nation. They mainly serve their own regional market. So also, if you have a particular type of product where the industry that you sell to has a specific region, for example, mining, you have certain areas in the north, Zacatecas and Durango and places like this, where you may want a representative just for that area because it has a lot of mining companies in it. Or if you have, your product is for automotive manufacturing, There are certain locations, Bahia region, for example, where you have a lot of auto manufacturing. You might say, regardless of whether it's close to Guadalajara or Monterrey, this is where I want my rep because this is where the industry is. Agriculture is another good example. You know, if you sell something that's for, what do you call those things, invernaderos? It's like a glass house that you put the plants in, protected agriculture, this type of thing. If you have tomatoes in Sinaloa and you have a product that really is specific to that, Sinaloa and Jalisco in the west part of Mexico, you might want to rep just for those areas. And so a lot of the details about what it is that you're trying to sell has to do with whether you want to go with a regional rep or a nationwide rep. But as I think I said before, a national rep oftentimes would be either a very large sales company that actually does have sales offices and staff in the major industrial markets throughout the country, or if you're going to sell a very expensive piece of equipment that you're only going to sell 1 or 2 or 3 a year in Mexico, you may go with one particular company because whoever needs that equipment is going to have to buy it from your national rep. So there's some aspects to that you might want to consider, and we'd be happy to talk through that with each company if they're interested in resolving that topic.
All right, thank you, Tom. Well, that's all the time we have today, and I hope you enjoyed our retreat fiesta. Before we sign off, if you want to set up a time to talk with Tom or someone on the international team about how we can help you expand your export sales or getting into the Mexican market specifically, please feel free to reach out to me. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much for your time.